Now we're in Modern Treasury. As you'll notice, we're situated under the Ledgers tab, and you'll see a different ledger that we'll use in a separate video. Let's not worry about this for now. For a Dash App digital wallet use case, we'll create a ledger from scratch. Before we do that, it's useful to know that our API is authenticated with basic authentication, where the username is the organization ID and the password is the API key. And we can retrieve these credentials under the Developer tab under the API key section in the UI, where we see both of those parameters. Thankfully, we don't have to worry too much about that. We're using our trusty Postman in this example, but if you're coding this out, make sure the base64 encode the username password string, include that under the authorization header. For now, let's actually create our first ledger. So we'll run a post request to the ledgers endpoint, where we have two required fields of name and currency and an optional field of description. It's useful to know the currency here is any ISO currency code. We've chosen USD. So let's actually send this request and see how it goes. So perfect, you can see we have a status of 201, means this was successfully created. And the ledger that we are created has an ID represented in the payload that will save to use in successive API calls. Before we do that, let's actually check the ledger UI, where we should see that ledger successfully created. Perfect. We can dive in here, and if you take a look, this is where eventually you'll see the transactions that have taken place in your business, as well as the accounts that are tied to those transactions. Currently, we see nothing. So as a natural next step, let's create the ledger accounts that we need for this use case. So moving back into Postman, we will create a debit ledger account and a credit normal ledger account by posting to the ledger accounts endpoint with three required fields of name, normal balance, and the ledger ID under which those accounts should be created, which is the ledger that we have just created previously. Alternatively, you can also find that in the summary page in the UI. But one piece to keep in mind is that in our example, our Dash App operating account is our debit normal account. It is a cash account and asset account. Meanwhile, Jeffrey B's digital wallet is our credit account, similar to a liability account. So what we'll do here is create the debit normal account and then create the credit normal account. And now we can actually glimpse back into the UI, refresh this page, and we should see those accounts populated in the Modern Treasury dashboard here. Now you can search those accounts by description, name, or any optional metadata you may have included. You can add a ceiling of an as of balance date to only show the ledger account balances up until that point. And you can even export this data in CSV format for your own internal reporting purposes. But currently we have no balances here under our ledger accounts. Let's actually move money between these accounts and create a transaction. So finally moving back into Postman, we will run a post request again, this time to the ledger transactions endpoint. And to create a transaction, we need the date that transaction happened, the effective date. We need a unique external ID that will only be tied to this transaction within this ledger. And we need ledger entries denoting both directions of that money movement. So additionally, it's useful to include a status, which can be pending, posted, or archived. And if you're integrating ledgers externally with a payment solution, often you set that status initially as pending and eventually update that to posted when the underlying payment posted the bank statement. For our example, we will use posted here. We'll include an external ID of 123. And for our ledger entries, we want to credit our credit normal account, increasing that account. And I'll move that in here. Similarly, we want to debit our debit normal account, our operating account, increasing that account as well. The amount within the ledger entry is noted in the lowest denomination of the currency that you've added in this ledger. So if you want to transfer $100 credited to Jeffrey B's account and also debited from our operating account, we'll choose 10,000 here. Now with this JSON request body properly set up, this is the true moment of truth. Let's actually send this transaction between the ledger accounts in our ledger. Perfect. So now if you move back into the UI and refresh this page, we should see a posted balance of 100 in both of the ledger accounts. It's useful to keep in mind that the pending balance is the accumulation of all posted transactions and pending transactions for a specific ledger account. Currently, we only have one posted transaction, so the pending balance will be the same as a posted balance in this example. And as we move into the Transactions tab, you can search transactions similarly by description or optional metadata. You can export those transactions as CSVs. As we drill into this transaction that we just created, debiting the operating bank account and crediting Jeffrey B's digital wallet, as you'll examine here, we will see the summary of that ledger transaction, the API audit trail, as well as the all familiar double entry of that transaction. So while we have increased both accounts, if we need to decrease them, we can credit the debit normal account, debit the credit normal account to serve as sort of payout to Jeffrey B and take that money out of the balances. But for now, this is our first example, and we'll come back soon to talk about how to create a ledger for a marketplace use case.